Now, hello and welcome to the first episode of Echoes. My name is Sparsh Agarwal. I'm the co-founder of Dorje, and I'm also a member of the Selim Hill Collective. Thank you so much for joining us today, for taking time out from your Friday evenings. So a little bit about Echoes. Echoes is a series of conversations about Darjeeling that is being organized by the Selim Hill Collective. These conversations are meant to revolve around the state of Darjeeling. Through these conversations, we hope to invite artists, writers, researchers, naturalists, planters who are concerned about Darjeeling and its decline, thereby curating not only a series of meaningful conversations to spread awareness about the region, the tea industry, the local community, and the biodiversity, but also to have conversations about how to revive it. The collective and members of the collective chose this name because by its very nature, an echo is supposed to travel far and wide. Thank you so much for joining us, Rajah. I'm going to indulge in a little bit of flattery here to give you an introduction only because I think, not because I think that you require an introduction, but because you deserve an introduction. So as you all already know, Rajah Banerjee is the former owner of Makaibari Tea Estate. He is the pioneer of the organic movement in Darjeeling. During his 47-year tenure at Makaibari, Rajah never discriminated. Through his caliber and creativity, he ensured that Makaibari became a global brand. So much so that everyone from the average Indian's dining table to the resolute desk of Queen Elizabeth herself, when they think about Darjeeling tea, they think about Rajah Banerjee. Rajah, thank you so much for taking the time out for joining us today. Rajah currently is spearheading Rimpocha, which is a small growers initiative that he will be talking about at the end of the discussion. And he's also the chairman of the Selim Hill Collective, which is hoping to create the next generation makeover and revival of Selim Hill Tea Estate. So I will start off by asking Rajah a few questions and getting his views on what's happening today and the pathway forward. And in about 30 to 35 minutes, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. I'm sure that all of you have a lot of things to ask Rajah about. If you can use the question answer box or the chat box to put in your questions, I'll do my best to try to involve it in my own roster of questions as I proceed along. If I'm not able to do so, I'll try to address them at the end of the discussion. Thank you so much, Rajah, for joining us.
Hi, Sparsh. It's been a pleasure to meet you offhandedly a year ago now. And it all started
exactly about a year ago.
It was July, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
So we've come a long way since then, haven't we?
Yes, that's right.
And do you remember how it all started? It started with a vision I had about creating a forest corridor between the Kurseong Valley, where Makaibari is, my former estate, through Bauni Pokri, up into Selim Hill, Narbang, Sipaidora, into Rimpocha, primarily because I do know there are a couple of tigers there to enhance that corridor. So do you recall? Have a recollection?
Yes.
Good.
I do. Very well. It's difficult to forget about any of our meetings.
And so after that flurry of exchanges I had with all the owners, proprietors, forest department, the only person who turned up through my doors were you. And you immediately invited me up to Selim Hill. And we had a session and I met all your family, your younger brother, who's a geek, who's fantastic. And of course, your indomitable mother, who's the essential glue to keep all you men folk in line. And a series of discussions followed there and at the Rimpocha House Studios in Siliguri that birthed the collective, that gave birth to it, vision of the collective. And here we are, a year down the line, ready to launch, because why? I wanted to hand the baton over to somebody, and you were the clever guy who was headed for Oxford, and I held you back, okay? So, how do we take it from here? Go on, you shoot a few questions and I'll try and answer them.
So, you know, we've the theme of this talk is Darjeeling, a second chance. And just to give our viewers a snippet about why we've named it so. So we are based out of Selim Hill Tea Garden, which is at 3,500 feet, right below Kershaw. And this is this is the state of the heritage structure that used to be there at Selim Hill Tea Estate. It was built in 1871, much like the condition of Darjeeling now. And so after an entire year of working on it, renovating it, keeping in mind the previous owner, speaking to them, we renovated it and we named it Second Chance House as a moniker for what we were trying to do. Now, that's the story behind why we named this talk Darjeeling a Second Chance. But before we speak about second chances, I guess the important question to ask Rajah is Darjeeling in decline? Does it even need a second chance?
Sparsh, that's an understatement if it needs second chance. Darjeeling is keeling over. Everybody who was anybody or anything has more or less fled. And the people who were running it well want to sell out and go now. Why this decline? Why is Darjeeling on her knees? There are 5 or 6 main points, and I'll try and distill the essence for you. The first one primarily is, of course, the archaic colonial hierarchical management. It should have gone out with the Brits, but it still exists. The second, I should imagine, is the indifferent and inept fertilization plan post-organic that's resulted in further crop loss and decline, and nobody knows where it will actually end. In the last 30 years of course going organic, the crop is less than halved. It's less than half. So that's a very dangerous situation. Third issue, women bend their back the hardest anywhere. And the tea estates were no exception. All the tea estates actually are shored up by women power. There's not enough initiatives for their empowerment. It's abysmal, in fact. They exploit it. That should be addressed and redressed. What is also the conditions that are existent in tea estates in Darjeeling are worse than minimal. There's a lack of quality primary and secondary education. There's very poor medical facilities, and the total lack of essentials on focus on basic health and hygiene. There's hardly any water supplies to any individual houses. People don't even have the privilege of owning their own houses, even after 5 generations living under the same roof. And of course, the last factor, I would say, is the complete ineffective use of technology, which is enabling us to converse and to reach out to so many people. So these are the 6 loose points that I would imagine have contributed to the decline of Darjeeling and its current status. Unless we address and redress that, I'm afraid there's going to be a lot of pain with a lot of gardens closing down within the next decade.
So I'm going to push you on each of these 5, 6 points that I've noted down right now as you spoke. I mean, we've already gone from 87 to about 74 now due to mergers and closures. So how do we prevent it further? But any act of prevention requires us to understand it a little better. So going back to the management style, right? You were the last owner who actually lived in the tea estate itself at Makaibari, right? Can you tell us about how important it is for the owners to live in the tea estates? You mentioned that absentee landlordism is an issue that affects the tea garden itself. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. See, Darjeeling is a very special place, a spectacular place, a magical place. Why? You arrive at Bagdogra or at New Jalpaiguri in Siliguri. You arrive at a temperate, tropical situation. Within an hour's drive, you're in Darjeeling, Kurseong, Kalimpong. It is European weather, temperate. Couple of hours drive uphill later, you're at Falutz on the Alpine Arctic. So what this translates to is a diversity of flora and fauna which you're not going to see anywhere in the world in such a small space. So the tea is the surplus of this botanical diversity. Okay. Fortunately for
Right.
us, the British
Right.
and because of this wonderful variation, each of the particular gardens, 74 now, as you rightly said, can have its special characteristics.
Hello. Hi. Sorry about that. I guess my internet, you lost me there for a second.
First of all, let's understand what is the role of a manager.
Right.
A manager has to motivate and to inspire. Okay? And to motivate and inspire, you need to earn your respect. The colonial hierarchical system demands respect, and we're towing that line. So we need a makeover change, complete change, and how to gain respect by walking the talk. So the new generation of managers must comply to this, and they must be re-educated. And the whole management structure should be geared up to a makeover management. That's what the collective intends to do.
Right.
At the Selim Hill Collective. That's one.
So, yeah, good. So I mean, so coming back to the 4 or 5 points that you mentioned, right? As you mentioned, absentee landlordism is one big issue. The second broad ambit that you touched upon was the idea of climate change. And climate change is something that is very important, especially for an area, a region as rich in biodiversity as Darjeeling. Can you take us through the impact of climate change for the region of Darjeeling?
Sure. When I first joined tea, so this is 1970, you could predict the weather, definitely. Then came the reign of the communists, and it became a free-for-all. And everybody's got rid of all the forests and tried to plant out tea. So whatever little balance you had in a permacultural situation, which was extremely necessary, either was grabbed with Jabardaka, or it turned into tea. So it became hopelessly monocultural. The moment you made it monocultural, you lost the balance of the predator cycle, and climate started changing. Moreover, there was a great influx of people from all over the place. Gurkhas were being flung out of Bhutan, Nepal, Northeast, and they were all congregating here. And it created a shortfall of space, and buildings started sprouting everywhere. So all available space, and particularly the greenery, went for a toss. So this urbanization, unchecked urbanization, land grab, and just knocking down the forest and putting up a shack there. The dams are the greatest threats which are in the Tista, because you're tampering with the Tibetan and the Indian plate, which are,
the damming of the Tista, though, is more recent, right?
No, it's about 20 years now.
Okay, all right.
So yeah, it's 20 years old, and it's horrible. And to add insult to injury, there was an old railway system that exists, it's called the Gale Express or whatever, that was washed out in 1953. We're having a new tunnel rail system. So you're tunneling all the waters of Tista, which is a free-flowing glacier river, has turned into a stagnant pool with huge changes in aquatic life and a lot of stress on the Tibetan and the Indian plate. And watch it. Any disturbance to that will create major earthquakes. It is a seismological prone zone. Okay? So watch out, there's going to be a major mayhem because of these reasons.
I mean, we've already noticed about 3-4 different earthquake incidents just in the last 1 year itself.
They were minor, but these are just the preliminary. These are the dress rehearsal, believe you me. But the major ones yet to come. Kathmandu experienced one a few years ago, and Sikkim did earlier. But we are yet to copy it. And I'm afraid there's going to be a bad one in the offing. And more importantly, on the tea, the climate change has taken a big role on crop patterns. The first flush is never on time. The second flush is never on time. And these are the two principal earners that stabilize Darjeeling tea estates. When you don't want sunshine, or when you get elevated, increased temperatures in the winter, so the insect breeding situation goes out of whack with the attendant bird life that feeds on it. So this has created havoc with the insect population going berserk too, particularly helopeltis, red spider, and its attacks on the tea. So going back to a permacultural situation is not impossible, is what we have to do. And to do that, we need everybody's cooperation from the ground up. How do we work it? This is another aspect which the collective is thinking of very critically.
So now you mentioned the impact on the biodiversity and how the cascading effect of that on tea. What is the impact of climate change's effect on wind and rainfall patterns on tea cultivation?
That's what I just touched upon earlier on.
So that means that our droughts, our traditional session of growing and cultivating tea is reducing. Is that it?
Well, it's gone berserk because as it is, we had a very small window of harvest, a 7-month harvest period. Any disruption to the climatic pattern shortens it, and hence productivity of the gardens, the quality, because you cannot make a first flush tea beyond the March 15th to April 15th window. If you hope to make that, it's a pipe dream. It doesn't happen. Similarly, the time for making second flush in between the first week of May and first week of June. You lose that, you've lost both flushes. And then again, when you get excessive rain in the monsoons or no rain in the monsoons, it's diametrically opposite to what the plants were used to. So your 7-month production window is shortened to a 5-month or 4-month without the vintages. So the attendant buyers go up. So you have less income. So it's a double-digit whack on the flavor and the balance sheet. So, and that's what's making it uneconomical.
Now, Rajah, you spent your entire life in Darjeeling, right? You were at Makaibari from 1970 itself. And around 1988, when Makaibari was the first tea garden to become organic, there was a huge organic boom. So what has changed now? What has brought, I mean, the great dilemma here is this, right? That Darjeeling makes one of India's best teas, the pride of India, one of the world's most unique products, and yet most of Darjeeling's tea gardens are making losses.
It's a compendium of many forces, but primarily, I think, falling production, the shortened window of climate change, and the political turpitude that has caused indiscipline, together with the indiscipline that came in. Oh, I must go back a little earlier. Since its inception, the tea had followed a particular pattern, a 5-year pattern. 2 years good, 2 years of plateau, 2 years of dip. So most of the plantation life and its allocation of funding had followed this cycle. Then came the new owners with the departure of the Brits. And these were mostly cash-rich traders who had very little empathy with the land, with the people, or the environment. So it's a matter of recovering their money quickly, making their profit, and buzzing off. With this policy, you'll be surprised to learn by the mid-70s, 30% of Darjeeling gardens had closed up completely. Another 40% were surviving. It was iffy, marginal. Another 30% would do well. And then the boom of 1984 happened. Prices quadrupled. Everything was made post that. It was the El Dorado. Darjeeling became the El Dorado. All the gardens revived. And this inexplicable quadrupling of prices also had its attendant negative side, because now the unions got new teeth. They could bargain for anything and the owners were not going to touch them. Along came the indiscipline with it. I was very worried because you cannot make great teas with
Right.
Hadley coarse leaf. Okay. So I thought long and hard. I love the area. So what do? So I made it a point to go organic and market it strictly as organic. I wasn't particularly interested, but a series of things, events, made me realize that. And we adhered to this time-tested modalities of plucking the finest, calling it organic, and that led the charge to establishing one criteria, that eco-agriculture was economically viable.
Right.
So when the crash came 10 years later,
Yeah.
everybody were clutching at straws.
And
so
I mean,
they
we're
followed.
still clutching on straws, right? I mean, with the
I'm coming to that. I'm coming to the fundamental issue of that. By clutching at straws, oh, Rajah Banerjee has made, sort of, he's getting fantastic prices. He's getting, carrying sackloads of silver. He's got a backache, not by falling off his horse, but by carrying sackloads of silver to the bank. Organic. Of course, going organic does not only entail no pesticides, a lack of pesticide, chemical free. You have to have its attendant inputs.
right.
Okay.
The ethos of being
the fertilization plan has to be right. You understand what I mean by fertilization plans, Sparsh?
short a little bit.
Come on, we've interacted enough in the year. I told you the critical factor of fertilization. Okay, let me put it this way. Let me draw an analogy. Let me share a little story, okay? A person who used to walking barefoot, the soles of his feet are so tough, he can walk on burning embers, okay? Then along comes Mr. Nike and gives this yogi, a Himalayan yogi, a Nike boot. He puts them on and wow, he's flying about the place, dunking like Michael Jordan. This is great. 3 months later, he's a tad worried. Why? Because the soles are wearing off. But Mr. Nike comes along, gives him another one. And this practice goes on for 70 years. After 70 years, can that yogi go back to being barefoot? He can, it'll be damn difficult, for sure. So this is what's happened from switching over from conventional practices to going organic. So your fertilization plan is the key.
So Rajah, you mentioned a host of different factors that have brought Darjeeling to a state of decline: management conditions, absentee landlordism, climate change, decreasing production and decreasing prices, and most importantly, the lack of a fertilization plan. But over the course of the last 1 year, to compound all of that and accelerate that further, we're also facing the pandemic. We faced multiple lockdowns over the course of the last 16 months itself. And you've mentioned this to me multiple times, that we're fighting for survival right now and we're on our last knees itself. So how serious is the crisis compared to 1970s? And right now, what are some of the kind of solutions that we require? And what I'm trying to draw you into is a conversation about how Makaibari actually decided to create a domestic market for Darjeeling tea, for any sort of a renaissance to pull us out of this state of decline. Do you feel that targeting Indian customers is the way forward?
Absolutely. And let me share another little anecdote that very few people know about. Towards the end of most of the Caucasian planters leaving, the Brits leaving, I was surprised. I was only about 23, 24 years old, as your age. And I was beetling up and down the plantation, whatever was planting trees. I'm a tree planter, not a tea planter, actually. And all of a sudden, I got a call from my dad saying, okay, the president of the Darjeeling branch Indian Tea Association, David Little, who was an Englishman, had the committee come in and wanted to meet me. I said, why me, Dad? You're the sub-district chairman, why didn't you go? No, you're wanted up there. I was surprised. I was only a couple of years in tea. But already Makaibari was making waves. It was nothing but hard work, okay? So off I went. And I told the select body that, look, I want to chill out. I rarely ever come up to Darjeeling. I want to chill out, but tell me what I have to do, what you want with me. I had long hair. I was really a hip cat then. And said, look, we believe that you're a breath of fresh air. We'd like to know, what is it that ails Darjeeling and how can we overcome it? I said, we all know selling the first flush and selling the second flush
Is the monsoon
is not. Okay, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, but it goes. You make profits in it. 60% of your crop, which is the post-second flush.
That's right.
Is the tea. So let me come back to you. Give me some time. I'll come back to you with a plan if you guys are really serious to implement it. So I spent about 300 hours and I created a thing called the Darjeeling Consortium then. And I went back to them and nobody was interested because they were all leaving, etc., etc. David Little was going off. Papua New Guinea, Canada was going off. They were all leaving.
No, I think that it's important for you to come back to what the consortium is, or was at least. What was it that you had structured?
The consortium is exactly, that's what I'm trying to get at. I was leading on to that. The consortium was all about, the Darjeeling Tea Consortium was all about getting a cumulative pool of a post-second flush tea as one brand, contributed by all the plantations. And we would take stock of it and market it in the Indian market. That was the idea, grand idea. Mm-hmm. So there were no takers. So there I was with a grand plan. So I had two choices, commit suicide or be a state-of-the-art Icarus who could fly. So I created a parachute and I launched the Makaibari packet teas, which knocked out all the other packet teas out of the market. And that was the one-stop shop for anybody coming to Darjeeling, that as long as I was back. Okay.
I mean,
so it was solely this tea that gave the launch pad to barter or bargain on the vintages and the exoticas.
Right.
So that is a critical factor.
I mean, but your association with going with ensuring that Darjeeling teas reach an Indian audience goes much further back as well, right? Your ancestors were also involved in creating the Lokchu and the Happy Valley packets that first started going to India.
Absolutely. In fact, my grandfather and Mr. Crease, Tommy Crease's dad, who was the owner of it, they launched the two teas together, packet tea. Teas, 1930, the hills took away, and it became very famous. So I just took a leaf out of that book and took it to Makaibari, and I added a few new tweaks, which enabled me to capture the brand very easily. So it was all done with the base point of marketing it in India.
So just to ask the last question within this bracket, we've spoken about, so then is the solution for Darjeeling's tea gardens right now also to try to be less beholden to international clients, to the international market, to all the different middlemen who are within this chain, and try to somehow go directly to the customer itself?
Yes, but we have to use technology very cleverly, and if you can ensure an education process of source of origin, which the collective envisages, that you've already incorporated with Dorje, packet the factory, use technology and your reach to go out to the people that you're getting it from source of origin to your doorstep. Right. And you've done it. You've beaten that. So you've cracked the first equation. You have set a ball in motion that will make the vision of the collective a success. And hopefully, like we did for the sustainable movement, it won't be the flavor in the balance sheet alone. It'll be bringing the flavor in the balance sheet of life, which is addressing the economics, addressing the politics, and the environment.
Okay? Right.
I know what you're going to ask me next, so go ahead and ask.
So now that we've spoken about the reasons for the decline, we've kind of tried to understand what are some of the inertias within the Darjeeling tea industry as well. One of the unique advantages of Darjeeling tea is the fact that we have these 4 flushes, and you yourself, do you think that the Darjeeling tea industry in general has made some kind of a mistake in not being able to market the story and the originality and the uniqueness of each of these four flushes to the customers?
Very little has been done to educate people about source of origin. And I don't like the word flushes because, it sounds rather chauvinistic and you're not. And you're a very egalitarian liberty. So let's call it vintages, shall we?
Okay.
And how do we take this exoticas and vintages to the next level is another art form, because quality and quantity are never synonymous.
Right.
It is, and Darjeeling traditional is an artifact. It is an artisanal industry that can only be treated as such. It's not really an industry, it's an handicraft.
Right.
So to promote this handicraft in the right forum, in the right way, is very critical to create an educative process about source of origin, what it's all about.
So at this point, before we take some audience questions, let me just draw Rajah in to talk about the two initiatives that he's a part of and that he's working on. Rajah, can you tell us a little bit about, and both of these initiatives are part of, I suppose, the path towards revival. Can you tell us a little bit about Rimpocha and the Rimpocha way of life and what you're trying to do with that?
It'll be my pleasure. Thank you, young man. Actually, once my ancestral house cindered in 2017, I decided to exit Makaibari. I took it as a portent. And I realized my idea, first initial impulse, okay, I've had a 47-year love affair with the tract of land. We're taken to an acme of excellence, both sustainability and ethics and so on and so forth. What do I do now? Drink beer, go to Bali, watch cricket, play polo, and meet my grandchildren in Australia and in Bangalore? Alas, man proposes and God disposes. Along came this vision of Rimpocha. Rimpoche, as you know, is a Tibetan word which means an enlightened avatar. So I decided to give myself a little pat on the back and said, let's be an enlightened tea avatar. So Rimpocha came into being. Now, as I've said earlier on, quality and quantity are not synonymous. So, and I realize also if it's your own cow, you do not need to tell the owner of the cow how to look after the cow. Okay? So the concept of small growers, which had been launched with a friend of mine, a buyer of mine, is no more with us today, was done in 1995 under the Chai initiatives, where 130 to 140 small growers were brought into the Darjeeling firmament. I reached out to them. They had started building the factories then, and we decided to make the artisanal, curated, very small quantities of teas. And since it's your own cow, it was only a matter of giving them the right price for the milk, akin to what Burgies had done and what resulted in Amul today. So Rimpocha has taken its first baby steps in 3 years, and 4 factories are in existence in Darjeeling now with small growers. They are not under the CTM, the certification trademark under geographic. I don't know why. They're all in Darjeeling, and Darjeeling means small growers need handholding. I wonder why the tea board does not give them the CTM, although they are. They are most in need of it. Okay, they're not recognized in Darjeeling, and we have been making some stunning teas. So I decided to promote them under Rimpocha. It's done well. And the focus was there to bring in a holistic panel. If you go into rimpochatea.com, you'll see there's a working philosophy.
Right.
Healthy soil is healthy mankind. How do we go about doing that? That is a core experience. Secondly, the fertilization plan with the holy cow. Why is the cow holy? Okay, it's in the horns. That's for a separate day, separate discussion. Right. Thirdly, empowerment of women, marginalized women. No community can hope to march dynamically unless and until women are empowered.
Right.
And fourthly, education, best primary and secondary education to build awareness and the capacity in the locality to capitalize on the terroir and the talent. And lastly, technology, to have partnerships, not ownership. These are the 5 core issues. And that is what brought us together. And now, after a year, I'd like to ask you a question, Sparsh.
Okay.
That is one end by which we are shoring up the ground reality.
From the grassroots level up.
Ensuring that the vintages of Darjeeling are preserved, the high quality exoticas, the
Right.
mystical silver needle, full moon imperial, and my signature teas. But the closure of Darjeeling Gardens, imminent diminishing returns, etc. So you cannot keep on shoring. There is going to be a plain of plenty. So the collective was birthed. I want you to enumerate what is the vision of the collective in a little more detail. Come on.
No, I will talk about it. I will just give a broad overview, following which I would like it to be documented what your ambition and vision for the collective is before an audience, so that this audience itself is able to, hold us up to it and say that you're not living up to those ideals. So,
okay, you have first go, then I'll put the nail on.
Right. So after we were able to understand what some of the issues with the garden was, we created a solution on the commercial side through a subscription system. And then Rajah used to push us that we need to create we need to have a more holistic revival as well. And therein took the birth of the Selim Hill Collective. As I see it, the Selim Hill Collective's large-scale mandate is to try to reimagine the space of the tea garden, to try to move away from the model of a commercially exploitable plantation towards that of a more inclusive and just tea garden, or of a more inclusive and just garden. And we focus on 3 primary areas for which we are trying to launch new initiatives right now. First is community welfare. The second is on biodiversity regeneration. And the third is to try to spread awareness about Darjeeling. And one of the reasons why the collective was very important to be created was to try to live by the ethos of truly making the tea garden organic, while also, with Rajah as the chairman, ensuring that we are able to prevent any kind of large-scale development within the tea garden itself that is not ecologically sustainable. Those were at least the motivations and the ambitions that I harbor with regard to the collective. And over to you about what your long-standing vision is and how you think that the Selim Hill Collective could be an answer towards the revival.
Well done, young man. That's within a year you've garnered a lot of information. I expect no less to the person of your intelligence and caliber. So again, in a nutshell, we'll go in and just sum it up and give the viewers a chance to ask questions which are meaningful and make the collective more dynamic. Because we have 2 years and 2 years in one mouth. If you keep on talking, oratory may be fine, but listening and hearing is also far more, proactively dynamic. So as I would like to point out and stress the fact that healthy soil is healthy mankind. That should be the primary foundational stone on which to build a community. Because tea estates are nothing but an organized village which is dependent on a monocultural crop tea. I mean, this to me is ridiculous because we've opined we are living in a magical land with immense diversity.
Right.
I think if we reach out to the diversity for traditional solutions of health with traditional medicine, you will unearth a Pandora's box that will be 10 times lucrative than the tea. So much so, a small example. We started an initiative before I exited Makaibari called Jari Booty, because I was a tree planter, not a tea planter. So there were 2 acres of forest to 1 acre of tea over there.
Right.
A unique permacultural situation. And we had a lot of herbs with Italian naturopaths, with Himalayan Institute of Goodwill and Living Ethics. We started a project called Jari Booty, trained by the Italian how to create these potions, the ferments, etc., and make it last. And within 2 years, this project, which was of the people, by the people, for the people, started paying for themselves and for their managers, and for even for the travel allowances for the Italians when they visit us twice a year. So this is the power which the land has, the botanical diversity has. And if you become a rhythm of nature, forget about conservation. Conservation is a very arrogant word. If you learn how to have the traditional beliefs of the animals, the lepchas, for example, we are looking at a regeneration of Darjeeling that takes the entire holistic approach that will enable all the communities over here to exist as a rhythm of nature.
So, Rajah, that gives us a good segue into something that I want you to talk about before we open it up, which is about the wildlife corridor itself. Since the conversation, we met because of the wildlife corridor, can you talk about what your vision is with regard to the wildlife corridor and why it's so important?
For example, can man live without oxygen? You can't. Trees are the most important green ventilators, and it's free of cost. Nature gives us everything free. And what does man do? We want to win against nature. The tea estates are an example of winning against nature. The political turpitude that has occurred because tea estates are the largest employers.
Right.
So they're manipulated any which way, resulting in discipline, lack of cooperation, so on and so forth. We need to settle all our differences, put our differences aside, and go on this holistic approach that you have a partnership below the ground, health in the soil, the creatures below the ground too, not only forest corridor. That's above the ground, which is the forest corridor, and tea as a part of the larger collective of the forest, then the arboreal life, the bird life, ornithological life, which is just majestic, into cyberspace, using technology and down to your doorstep in a completely green, circular economy that addresses all the grievances and creates a win-win at all, a partnership that says no to Corona.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Rajah. That's been a fascinating talk. And now I think it's time for us for those who've patiently heard us, to hear their questions. The first question that we've got, I think that's very important for you to answer specifically, is from Ms. Aravinda Anantaraman. Her question is, despite all of these challenges that you've enumerated, and despite long years of struggle in Darjeeling itself, what makes Darjeeling tea still relevant?
As I think the answer was explained earlier, but let me reiterate. You arrive at the 3 climatic zones, which translates to a diversity of flora and fauna which cannot be found anywhere in the world. That is the special part of it. And when you talk about the terroir of Darjeeling, you're not only talking about the slope, soil, the genus of the plant, the season of harvest, but you're talking about the 5th factor, which the French sommeliers cannot even comprehend. It is the area-specific locale microclimate of insects, birds, the contribution it has. That is the magic. Do you know that the word Darjeeling is not Darjeeling, is Dorje Ling, because of a natural phenomena, just to explain. In 1835, there's only one monastery, Gum. And in between the first flush and second flush, there's a period, which is a bungee period, around the middle of April. And it's that time these monks used to line up on the top of the hill in Gum and look down across the plains to look at those clouds sweeping up the Bay of Bengal. The moment they could see the flashes of lightning, they knew they were in for a northwester hit, or the Kawasaki hit in 4 hours. And they used to start their chanting. Darjeeling. As it approached, Darjeeling, a notch higher. Closer, Darjeeling. 4 hours later, it's right over, then think of the end of the world, with this furious lashing of this fierce summer nor'wester. Darjeeling, crash. The Brits couldn't pronounce the word. Dorje Ling. Dorje means thunder, Ling means land, land of the thunderbolt, which was created by these monks. It became Darjeeling. That's why it's so special. And this shower, which breaks the long winter drought, transform it magically after one gush from spring to summer, releasing all the summer life forces. It's a buzz, then it's a magical period. Come along. She's from
I think that Miss Anantaraman is from Bangalore.
Mr. Anantaraman,
Miss
I'd like
Anantaraman.
to hold your, yeah, Mr. Anantaraman, I'd like to hold your hand. Come at April the 15th, I will show you the true magic of Darjeeling in its experiences. Seeing is believing. Okay.
So moving on to the next question, which is about, and I think now we're having a little bit of fun as well. It's from Nicole Patterson. Nicole's question is, how do you think that this year's harvest compares to last year's and that of 10 years before?
Well, I don't think you can compare year-wise like that. It's not a wine.
Okay.
And it's totally dependent on my personal preference. Okay. I think there is very little variation if you follow the rhythm of nature. And every year can make a superb first flush vintage or second flush, but it's not fixed. You have to be attuned to these nuances, the variation, adapt your manufacture, your picking, etc. The trick is, the finer the leaf, the better the tea, and the right movement of the sun, moon, and stars. If you can do it, it's fantastic. But this year's teas have been delayed due to a prolonged drought and climate change. And most people gave up hope, but the ones who never gave up made some terrific teas, which were better than last year's.
So, Rajah, you had mentioned during your time at Makaibari, you did a lot with regard to women's empowerment. In fact, we got in a question last night itself, asking you, from someone who wanted me to ask you about your experience with regard to women's empowerment initiatives and what we can learn with regard to Selim Hill and how we can promote that at Selim Hill itself.
It's very simple. Women bend their back the hardest and always relegate to second class. The more marginal, the poorer the community, the greater the exploitation. And in tea estates, they are horribly exploited since its inception. The only way you can do it is to empower them. And the first thing I did, it's a male-dominated chauvinistic society, which is understandable because the Gorkhas are the world's fiercest martial race. So my first challenge was to get women supervisors to break this monopoly. And as an experiment earlier on in 1990 or so, when I had my first couple of women supervisors, post-retirement of a few men, immediately I was surrounded or get out in those terms by a group of men saying, this is not net, you want to accept it, blah, 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 etc., etc. I said, hey, hang on. This is an experiment. And I'd like to see at the end of the year, whose productivity is better, the men's or the women's? They were pacified, they went away. At the end of the year, we took count of productivity, the women's first year debutantes were 3 times better than the men's. I rest my question. There was never any glitches after that. That was the first step.
So we've also gotten another question about how community-based tourism initiatives, community-based regenerative tourism projects can help prevent the decline of Darjeeling. And I think that connects back to the previous answer you gave. About
yes, absolutely. Yes, thanks for reminding me. Thanks for reminding me. So what happened at that point was that was one, and we coupled it with a homestay program. And there was a terrific man over here who's done a lot for villages. He's a saint. We call him the Gandhi of ecotourism. There's Rajah Banerjee, marvelous guy. And we invited him, and he started the first training process. And it was quite an adventure. And what it intended, it had a runaway success in Makaibari. I don't know the plight of the program now, but as long as I was there, it was just booming. We were always full up, and the women earned and had an income away from the home. And the moment marginalized women have an income, extra money jangling in their pockets, they make the most fantastic investment. The best education for the children, primary, which creates awareness, And the best education there, money can buy for second grade, which builds the capacity that awareness creates. Well, when you combine the two, you get a self-respecting grassroots entrepreneur in the making who can take on any challenges, who is fully aware of being a civically responsible person. And I think in our subcontinent, what we lack is civic sense. And this model of what we envisage with the collective will create civic sense and hopefully will be a torchbearer for the rest of the villages of India too, not only in tea.
Right. So, I mean, increasing income for the larger community through this kind of a community-based regenerative tourism model is something that could possibly be a success story, as it used to be, at least at Makaibari. I don't know whether it still happens or not.
No, it has grown in all the villages. We launched it. There were none in TS. Now it's grown all of them. There are over 200 initiatives in the villages of Darjeeling, not alone in Tea Estate. Okay. And the other aspect, don't forget, when you have money coming in, education comes in. It's a different ball game. For example, I'd like to ask you another question before we go on. The last time I was in Selim Hill, I noticed a guy with a motorbike ponytail come in, park himself, and then he disappeared. And I asked you, would you like to tell others what this is about the return of the expats?
Yeah, I think that there has been a large scale in-migration again of a lot of people back to places like Kershong, Kalimpong, Darjeeling, Sonada, Ghum because of the pandemic. And that is an entire energy of, that is an entire pool of talent that can be tapped by the local community itself, by the local region. So there are a couple more questions that are still waiting, Rajah, that I think are very important. One question that is coming in from multiple viewers today is about this interesting point that you made about the quadrupling of prices in 1984. Can you please explain to us a little bit more about what happened and what led to that?
Nobody knows the answer. I wish I could tell you. Then we could quadruple it again. And that's why the collective is here, to quadruple it in the long term. Nobody's cracked it. It just quadrupled. It never happened in this 150 years of existence. And that got the monkey out of the woodworks completely. And everything went berserk. And then with further decline, it's attendant discipline, and you can demand anything and get away with it and so on and so forth. It is a chain reaction. You had a flip side to it, an underbelly which was not desirable at all. And that's why I was aware of it. I knew that the standards of discipline were going, the quality would be declining. So organics was the answer. Less in your crop, but make quality. I understood by that. So quality and quantity are not, thing. And educate the people from source of origin. Pack it in the garden, send it out. And now we have technology to do it. Come on. We can turn it around. Let's do it, Sparsha. We are on the right track. Okay.
Here we have a couple more questions, and I'm going to quickly run through it, Rajah, to get your to pluck your silver needles there on your head and ensure that everyone gets it. So we've got a couple of technical questions here. Does the aging of tea bushes also affect production capacity? Is something that a couple of people have asked us.
Well, it's a double-edged whammy, really. I would say that magic of Darjeeling is about the varietals that we have from the original Camellia sinensis. Did a test as way back in 1970-71, over 3,000 bushes in the same plot, and we got 3,000 different qualities. And all the intermingling of those qualities actually gave the magic, which is the terroir, one of the contributors of terroir. When you bring in a clone, because of its some specific qualities, it also has a flip side to it, because a clone will never have a tap root. It has feeder roots, so it can be subject to many, many vicissitudes of nature, and particularly climate change, not advisable. Now, to keep the matrix of Darjeeling's mystique, the unique flavor, it is very important to keep this original species alive. And particularly with the Chinese bushes, if you go below the ground and give it a collar prune, it comes up as new. So if you go in for rejuvenation prune every year, 2.5%, every 40 years, you're getting a new tea estate per se. And of course, if any, there'll be some deaths in between. You will fill them with whatever material you want to keep this alive. That would be my advice. Do not mess around with the unique flavor of Darjeeling with the original China Camellia sinensis seeds. Yes.
Okay, so we have one last question here, which is, we've got actually a couple of questions that are still left, and we still have 5 minutes time, so I'm going to run through that. So one important question that we've got is, how well do the Organic Rainforest Alliance and other eco labels capture the reality of a tea plantation, which have these kind of labels?
Initially, I'd say it was mega, because we caught the surge in Germany, who are our major supporters. And Germans were way ahead of back as far as the organic movement was concerned. So Darjeeling was dependent on German buying. So when we went organic, it was a boom, bam, okay? Initially, there was also another demand caused by Max Havelaar coffee. So fair trade tea was in demand. So the fair trade label, together with, in conjunction with the organic thing, was a premium earner. And the early birders really caught this trend. Fall out of it, when a product becomes mainstream, everybody joins the bandwagon. It becomes very difficult to weed out the chaff from the wheat. Certification becomes inevitable, and certification entails bureaucracy, and bureaucracy entails policing. So now the paper trail is getting longer and the eco trail is getting shorter, I'm afraid. So we need to streamline this. And that's why the Dorje initiative is going to be so important, to take the organic or the sustainable movement to a whole new ballgame altogether with technology.
Before we end, I think that there's a very important question that has come in from Mr. Vikram Mittal, who's asking, if we consider Darjeeling to be a boutique industry, why is it that we have not standardized the grades of tea produced in terms of leaf size? And there is a very complicated grading system that exists between SFT, GFOP, whole leaf, brocans, fannings, dusts. How do you think that has also contributed to our decline in some senses, Rajah? And to have some full disclosure here, that was your creation.
Well, let me hide behind my mustache. I don't have your stylish, hirsuteness, which is a style these days. But actually, I'm blushing because I decided to take the Mickey out of everybody, because when I first joined tea, I found that there were 4 main grades of leaf: FTGFOP, TGFOP, BOP, OF, and dust primarily. So I added a T, and everybody started following that. I added an S, everybody started following that. And I had plenty of laughs and chuckles to myself. I think the finer the leaf, the better the tea. If you have no brokens at all, if you have a fine plug tea, you can pack it in the garden. You don't need any sorting, if you ask me. Right. Okay.
Well, that brings us to an end. I mean, we've stuck to the time limit. It's exactly 7 o'clock. I will give the closing address. So apologies for going 2 minutes above the time limit. Timing is very important to people who are within the tea industry. A minute here, a minute there, and you lose the muscatel flavor that Darjeeling's second flush is so famous for, which is right now being produced. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Rajah, for taking the time out. I will give a couple more lines about Rajah, right now. Rajah's signature product is the Midnight Imperial Silver Needle Teas. And I often feel my favorite author is Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie has the book Midnight's Children. I believe that one can paraphrase Rushdie to call Rajah Midnight's Planter. Not just because of his signature product, but also because, and I'm going to take the liberty here to divulge Rajah's age. At the age of 74, he's turning 74 this year. He was born just 1 month before India was born in July 1947. Despite the fact that despite his age, he has been very supportive and he has been very energetic for in helping us think through what the problems with the Darjeeling tea trade have been. He's given us his time, his energy, his wisdom in helping us create Dorje and the Selim Hill Collective. In subsequent episodes of Echoes, we are hoping to invite further guests. The next episode of Echoes will be taking place at the same time next Friday. We will be having as our guest Mr. Chaitanya Tamhane, who's a filmmaker who's famous for his recent work, The Disciple. Previous to Disciple, he made the movie Court in 2015, which was India's entry into the Academy Awards that particular year. Before Court and The Disciple, before Mr. Tamhane became much more famous, in 2011, he had come down to Makaibari and he made this movie called Six Strands. It's a 16-minute short film, which we will be screening and watching with Mr. Tamhane himself, followed by a question answer and a conversation with him. If you like, if you appreciate and like the kind of work we're trying to do, if you would like to help support us, you can help support us by going on to dorjeteas.com. We've created a subscription system whereby you can buy directly from the farm, from Selim Hill Tea Estate itself. And the subscriptions help support the initiatives and activities of the Selim Hill Collective. For each tea club member who joins, we also plant a tree in your name. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Rajah, for taking the time out, and hope you have a great weekend ahead. To all our viewers, we hope to see all of you next Friday this time as well. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.